anti-Semitism and the foreshadowing of a similar position, focus on the issue of Islamophobia, could help to ease some of those tensions here in Australia, but not all are convinced it'll be enough or has been done with the urgency so desperately required. Live from Parliament House on Ngunnawal country in the nation's capital and acknowledging other custodians, I'm Matthew Doran and this is your afternoon briefing. Great to have your company this Tuesday. Also ahead this afternoon, Pacific leaders have gathered in Brisbane to talk about how to keep the region's banking system afloat. We'll speak to the Assistant Treasurer, Stephen Jones, about that issue shortly. But first, this Tuesday afternoon, to the Prime Minister's announcement of a special envoy to combat the rise of anti-Semitism. Anthony Albanese says the shockwaves from the war in Gaza have been keenly felt here in Australia, and he's worried it's straining, if not tearing apart, the nation's precious and delicate social fabric. The Prime Minister says this is the first of two appointments, with another to be revealed imminently, looking at the issue of growing Islamophobia in Australian suburbs. Mr Albanese says every Australian deserves respect and deserves to feel safe.
What is occurring here needs a stop. When you have the war memorials, for example, desecrated as they were a short time ago, I just shake my head at how that can occur in Australia in 2024. We're a place where, as a democracy, we encourage people to be able to have different views and to discuss these issues respectfully. But that's the key word here, respect.
October 7 changed our world as well. And all over the world, anti-Semitism has become normalised, and this is very dangerous for us all. The statistics on anti-Semitism in Australia right now are shocking and confronting. Immediately after October 7, they were up 700% on what existed previously. But they are still disturbing and confronting, 400 to 500% higher than previously. But of course, we need to look beyond the numbers. We see the individuals whose lives have been impacted in tragic and profound ways. Jewish parents, as we've heard, worried about sending their children to school. Jewish artists, authors, musicians, subjected to exclusion and shadow bans. Jewish members of the LGBT community excluded. We see small business owners who have lost their livelihoods to boycotts and vandalism. And all this affects the vibrancy and cohesion of the community more generally. And this is not the Australia we want. This is not the Australia we expect.
Jillian Segal, the new anti-Semitism envoy there. Let's bring in Daniel Aghion here. He's the president of the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, and he joins us now live from Melbourne. Daniel Aghion, welcome to Afternoon Briefing. First of all, the creation of a role of an anti-Semitism envoy, what are you actually hoping this sort of role would achieve? Is it simply shining a light on these sort of incidences happening in the community, or does it go further than that?
Well, good afternoon, Matt. I think it does two things. First of all, it does shine the light in the sense that it's a message from government, isn't it, as to the seriousness of this issue and the seriousness with which government thinks it ought to be treated. But second of all, and perhaps more importantly, it's about coordinating a response to this normalisation of hate and advising the government, both the Prime Minister and the Minister for Multicultural Affairs, as to how best to combat it.
So when we're talking about a rise in anti-Semitism, we heard Jillian Segal there saying 500% more prevalent in the community at the moment. Can you give us some examples as to how your organisation sees it playing out in the community at the moment?
Yes, well, our organisation, which represents the Jewish community here in Australia, has been keeping these statistics for over 30 years. And we've seen increases come and go in the order of 10, 15% from year to year. Post 7 October, there was an absolute explosion in the order of 735% in the 2 months immediately following. And that has now, I'm embarrassed to say, settled at an increase of about 400 to 500% year on year. These are not minor things. We're talking about death threats. We're talking about matters that have had to be referred to police, which have led to charges being laid. We're talking about serious instances of hate directed at people simply because they are Jews. Here in Melbourne, for example, there was a notorious example about 3-4 weeks ago where one of the major Jewish day schools had the words "Jew die" written on its front walls, so that when the school students turned up the next day, that's what they were confronted with.
Does criticism of Israel's actions in this war in Gaza, concerns about how it's behaving in areas like Rafah and the like, does that constitute anti-Semitism?
No, of course not. So let's do it this way. There can be all kinds of criticisms of the Israeli government, its policy, its government policy, its military policy, indeed all kinds of things. That's not anti-Semitism. The mere fact that one might be critical of Israel, that one might be calling for a free Palestine, for example, that's not anti-Semitic. There's really two elements to it. The first is the outpouring of hate that we've seen, which has, it seems to have been triggered by 7 October, but has no causal connection to it beyond that trigger. For example, the example I gave of that offensive daubing on a Jewish day school, that's got absolutely nothing to do with a conflict half a world away. The second where would involve Israel would be if you called out Israel in a way that you wouldn't call out any other country in a similar situation. If you do that, and you're treating Israel as a special case in a way that you wouldn't treat any other country in that same circumstance, one has to ask, why are you doing that? And what is your motivation for doing so? But healthy criticism of a government, well, criticism is criticism. That's perfectly legitimate.
I note that when you were talking about the statistics when it comes to anti-Semitism across the country, you were talking about the fact that the Executive Council of Australian Jewry represents the Jewish community. There are, of course, other groups that represent portions of that community as well, including the Jewish Council of Australia. They've come out today and said that the appointment of Jillian Segal to this role as a very pro-Israel individual is actually detrimental to the cause here, to what this role is seeking to actually uncover and highlight. How would you respond to that sort of criticism?
Well, I think the first thing to say is no community is monolithic. Obviously, any community, ethnic or otherwise, has different viewpoints within it. I represent and speak on behalf of all of the major synagogues, community groups, sporting clubs and so on within the community, and it's from there that I speak and have that representation. In terms of Jillian, Jillian is an excellent candidate, may I say, and an excellent appointee because of the very fact of her moderation. She's very well respected in government, in corporate life, in academic life, and she's actually the perfect appointment. The complaint or the comment about Jillian Segal and about the position more generally fails, I think, to grapple with the uniqueness of the position that we're facing post 7 October, that we've had this absolute explosion because of hatred and this normalisation of it. That's what we've got to deal with, and that's the need for the role and for an exceptional appointee like Jillian Segal.
Daniel Aggie, and we are out of time. I have to leave it there. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
We're turning to some other